The rain in London did not simply fall, it wept, a relentless, mournful drumming against the gray slate roofs of the city, shrouding the world in a veil of silver mist and biting cold. It was a weather that seeped into the bones, a damp chill that mirrored the desolate winter that had taken residence in the soul of Charles Sterling. When Charles opened the heavy, iron-reinforced oak door of his Kensington mansion that late October afternoon, the weight of the mahogany under his hand felt like the lid of a coffin. He never imagined, in the darkest recesses of his grieving heart, that the scene he would find awaiting him on the other side of that threshold would shatter the ice encasing his life forever. He received the silence of the grand foyer like a strange, suffocating embrace. After 2 weary weeks touring offices in London and New York, closing multi-million-pound deals that would expand his real estate empire throughout the furthest reaches of the globe, he expected to be greeted by the usual frantic bustle of his home. He anticipated the hurried, clipped footsteps of Mrs. Halloway, organizing the staff with military precision, perhaps the distant, muffled murmur of the television in the kitchen, or the clinking of fine china being put away in the scullery. But no, the house exuded an unusual, almost magical calm, a stillness that felt thick and suspended in time. He left his leather suitcase by the sweeping marble staircase and loosened the knot of his Savile Row tie, the silk feeling like a noose around his tired neck. The flight from New York had landed 3 hours ahead of schedule, aided by a fierce tailwind across the Atlantic, and on a sudden, inexplicable impulse, he had decided not to notify anyone of his early arrival. He wanted to surprise Jack and Lily, his 4-year-old children, the only sons that illuminated his bleak existence since Elizabeth left 2 years ago, taking with her not only his heart, but also the laughter that once made these walls sing. He walked down the main hallway, his hand-stitched Oxfords clicking softly, rhythmically, on the polished oak floor. The golden light of the waning afternoon filtered through the enormous, rain-streaked windows, painting the pale walls in warm amber tones that seemed at odds with the gloom outside. Something was different. He couldn't identify it immediately, a scent, a feeling, but the atmosphere of the house had changed. There was life here, a pulse. That was when he heard the soft, rhythmic breathing. He stopped in the doorway of the main drawing room, and the world froze on its axis. There on the Chesterfield sofa that Elizabeth had chosen on her last trip to Paris, a piece of furniture he usually avoided looking at, was the most beautiful and heartbreaking scene he had witnessed in years. A young domestic worker, no older than 20, was fast asleep, with Jack and Lily snuggled up deeply against her chest. Her blue and white uniform, crisp yet worn, contrasted with the yellow cleaning gloves she was still wearing, as if she had fallen asleep in the very middle of her exhausting labors. The girl's dark, unruly curls fell over her shoulders like a cascade of midnight silk, and her delicate features showed a peace, a serenity, that he had not seen on any face in this mausoleum of a house for a long, long time. But what truly paralyzed Charles Sterling was not her. It was his children. Jack had his little head resting on the young woman's left shoulder, his small fist clutching the fabric of her uniform with a desperate tightness, as if he feared she might dissolve into mist if he let go. Lily had curled up against her right side, her little face buried in the employee's chest, and her lips formed a soft, contented smile as she slept, a smile Charles hadn't seen since the funeral. Both children breathed with the absolute, heavy tranquility of someone who knows they are completely safe, completely held, completely loved. Charles felt something shatter inside his chest, a dam breaking behind his ribs. How long had it been since he last saw his children sleeping like that? When was the last time he saw them seeking someone's embrace with that tender, raw desperation? Since Elizabeth's death, Jack and Lily had become shadows of their former selves, ghosts haunting their own nursery. They cried every night, screaming for a mother who would never return. They rejected every nanny he hired, screaming until the women quit in frustration. Mrs. Halloway, his trusted housekeeper and governess for 15 years, the woman who had run his life with an iron fist, assured him that the children were fine, that they just needed time, discipline, and routine, and that he shouldn't worry so much with his busy schedule. But this was different. This was not discipline. This was sanctuary. He advanced slowly, stepping with the caution of a man afraid of breaking a fragile spell. On the coffee table, there was evidence of a spent afternoon, a tableau of joy, scattered crayons, sheets of paper filled with children's drawings of crooked houses and disproportionate suns, and a storybook open to a page showing a friendly dragon. On the floor, next to the sofa, he recognized his children's tiny shoes, neatly lined up side by side. Two small lamb's wool sweaters, neatly folded, hung on the back of the armchair. The house wasn't just spotless, it was alive. He moved closer, studying the young employee with intense curiosity. He didn't recognize her. When Mrs. Halloway had hired her, her face had been just a blur in the background, possessing that simple, unassuming beauty of good people without makeup or pretensions. Even while asleep, there was something maternal, something ancient and instinctive, in the way her arms protectively surrounded the children, as if her body knew that its primary function in that moment was to care, to protect, to shield. Charles brought a hand to his face, feeling the rough stubble of a 2-day beard growing on his jaw. A strange, overwhelming emotion crashed over him, gratitude mixed with a deep, piercing sadness. How was it possible that a complete stranger, a girl who scrubbed his floors, had achieved in weeks what he couldn't achieve in 2 years? How was it possible that his children, his little ones, eternally set and withdrawn, had found comfort in the arms of an employee whose name he didn't even know? He sat down carefully in the wingback armchair facing the sofa, without taking his eyes off that scene. The last rays of the sun pierced through the heavy linen curtains, bathing everything in an orange, ethereal light that seemed to have been taken from a Renaissance painting. For the first time in a long time, Charles Sterling, the man who had built an empire from scratch, the businessman feared in boardrooms from Canary Wharf to Wall Street, the widower who had learned to hide his agonizing pain behind expensive Savile Row suits and endless meetings, allowed himself to feel. And it hurt. God, how it hurt. It hurt to remember how Elizabeth used to fall asleep exactly like that with the newborn twins, her hair fanning out over them like a protective halo. It hurt to acknowledge that he had been so immersed in work, in his own selfish pain, in the constant escape from the memories that lurked in every corner of this house, that he had not noticed that his children still needed what he no longer knew how to give: tenderness, presence, a home. A soft sob pulled him from his dark thoughts. Lily stirred slightly, murmuring something unintelligible in her dreams. The young employee, still asleep, instinctively adjusted her embrace, pulling the child closer, and began to hum a soft melody, so gentle that it could barely be heard over the ticking of the grandfather clock. A lullaby. Charles recognized the song immediately. Rock-a-bye Baby, the same one that Elizabeth sang, the same melody that used to drift from the nursery in those golden days before the sickness took her. Tears threatened to escape his eyes, stinging and hot, but he held them back. He had cried enough in the shower, in the car, in lonely hotel rooms. Now he needed answers. Who was this girl? Why did Mrs. Halloway never mention that the children had finally found someone who could comfort them? Why was it that he, who prided himself on knowing everything about his assets and his business, had no idea that this transformation had occurred under his own roof? He observed the details: the young woman's delicate hands, showing signs of hard work, red knuckles, short nails, the yellow cleaning gloves she continued to use as if she had fallen asleep after a long day of scrubbing the oak floors. The simple uniform had been washed so many times that the blue had lost its intensity in some places, fading to a soft gray. There was no jewelry, no watch, not even a simple ring. It was clear that she came from a life of hardship, a life where every penny counted. And yet, she had given his children something that all the millions of pounds in his bank accounts could not buy: peace. Jack stretched slightly and his eyes opened a crack. For a second, the boy seemed disoriented, blinking against the dim light, until his gaze met the young woman's face. Immediately, a smile appeared on his lips, pure and unadulterated, and he closed his eyes again, pressing himself closer to her warmth. Grace, the little boy murmured sleepily, his voice thick with slumber. Don't go, Grace. So that was her name. Grace. Charles etched that name in his memory as an absolute certainty settled in his chest. Whoever this Grace was, whatever was happening in his house during his absences, he needed to know everything. And he sensed, with that sharp intuition that had made him the successful businessman he was, that this afternoon's unexpected return had been the beginning of something much bigger than any million-pound deal. It had been the moment his life began to change. The invisible connection had been forged. 15 minutes passed before anything moved. Charles had remained motionless in the armchair, observing the scene with a mixture of fascination and melancholy he hadn't felt since the first days after Elizabeth's funeral. In the silence of the room, broken only by the quiet breathing of the three sleepers and the distant, rhythmic ticking of the hall clock, he had found a kind of involuntary meditation. It was Grace who woke first. Her eyelids fluttered gently, confused by the orange light of the sunset, which now bathed the entire room in coppery hues. For a moment, her honey-colored eyes wandered aimlessly across the mansion's high ceiling, tracing the intricate plasterwork, until reality hit her like a bucket of ice-cold water. She sat up abruptly, with such force that Jack and Lily woke with a start. "Mr. Sterling," Grace's voice came out as a choked whisper, heavy with panic. Her cheeks flushed bright red, a crimson tide of embarrassment, as she clumsily tried to stand without abruptly waking the children further or dropping them. I didn't, sir, forgive me, I was just, Daddy!" Lily's joyful cry sliced through the heavy air like a flash of lightning. The little girl launched herself from the sofa and ran toward Charles with outstretched arms, her face beaming with a smile he hadn't seen in months. Jack followed immediately, though with more cautious steps, rubbing his eyes as if he were still processing that his father was really there, a solid presence in the room. Charles knelt down on the oak floor just in time to receive the impact of his two little hurricanes. He hugged them tightly, burying his face in their tousled hair, inhaling that scent of baby shampoo and vanilla cookies that always transported him to happier days. "My loves," he murmured against their heads, his voice thick with emotion. "I missed you so much." "Didn't you say you were coming today?" Lily protested, gently pounding her chest with her little fists. "Grace said you'd arrive on Saturday." "I decided to come back early to see you," Charles explained, though his eyes were no longer on his children, but on the young woman who stood by the sofa, nervously wringing her hands, her gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. "Mr. Sterling, I can explain," Grace began, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "The children were playing in the garden, and after their afternoon tea they asked me to read them a story, and I had no intention of going to sleep. I swear, I was finishing cleaning the library windows, and—" "Grace read us the story of the good dragon," Jack interrupted, still clinging to his father, but looking at the young woman adoringly. "She does the best voices, Daddy. She makes the dragon sound like it has hiccups. And then she sang the lullaby," added Lily, now hanging from Charles's neck. "The one Mummy used to sing." The silence that followed was dense, laden with meanings that no one dared to utter. Charles stood up slowly, still holding Lily in his arms. His gaze finally met Grace's, and what he saw there completely disarmed him. It was not the calculating gaze of someone seeking to take advantage, nor the servile expression of someone only following orders out of fear. It was the transparent gaze of someone genuinely worried. Someone who feared she had done something wrong when her only sin had been loving two children who were not her own. "How long have you been working here, Grace?" Charles asked, keeping his voice deliberately calm. 3 months, sir," she replied, lowering her gaze even further. "Mrs. Halloway hired me in July. I am in charge of general cleaning and helping in the kitchen when needed." "And Mrs. Halloway knows that you spend time with Jack and Lily?" Grace hesitated, her fingers intertwined more tightly, and Charles noticed her knuckles turning white from the pressure. "I only take care of them when she's busy with other things, sir. The children sometimes look for me when they finish their activities, and I say—" "Grace, play with us," Jack interrupted enthusiastically, breaking free from his father to run towards the young woman. He clung to her uniform with the same tender desperation that Charles had observed while they slept. "She knows how to make paper airplanes that fly to the ceiling. She knows all the princesses' names, and she makes heart-shaped biscuits." "And she doesn't scream," Lily added more seriously, slipping out of her father's arms to stand by her brother. "She never shouts." Those last words echoed in Charles's head like a siren. She never shouts. Mrs. Halloway, Charles murmured to himself, a cold fury beginning to coil in his gut. What on earth had been happening in my own house during my absences? Grace crouched down until she was at the twins' eye level, and Charles watched as her features softened instantly as she looked at the children. She arranged their hair with maternal gestures and cleaned the chocolate stains they had at the corners of their lips with her thumb. She checked that their socks were pulled up properly. They were automatic, natural gestures, the kind of things a mother would do without even thinking about it. "Kids, your dad just got back from a very long trip," Grace said sweetly, her Yorkshire accent softening the vowels. "Why don't you wash your hands and faces before dinner? I'm sure you have a lot to tell him." "Are you coming to have dinner with us?" Lily asked, confidently taking Grace's hand. The young woman looked at Charles with uncertainty, and he saw a shadow of resignation pass through her eyes as if she already knew the answer. That servants did not dine with masters, but did not want to disappoint the children. "Grace needs to help prepare dinner, my love," Charles interjected gently. "But perhaps she can come and say goodnight afterward." Grace's eyes widened in surprise, and something akin to gratitude shone in them for a fleeting moment. "Yes, of course," she replied, affectionately squeezing the children's hands. "Now go, and remember to wash well behind your ears." Jack and Lily ran out towards the bathroom in the hallway, their laughter echoing through the marble corridors. For the first time in 2 years, the sound of children's joy filled that house that had so long been a mausoleum of memories. When they were alone, Grace stood up straight and tried to regain her professional composure, smoothing her wrinkled uniform and removing the yellow rubber gloves from her hands. "Mr. Sterling, I sincerely apologize for falling asleep. It won't happen again. I know my job is—" "Why do my children call you when they are scared?" Charles interrupted, taking a step towards her. It wasn't an accusatory question, but a genuinely curious one. Grace blinked, surprised by the question. "I don't know if they call me when they're scared, sir." "Jack murmured your name in his sleep. He asked you not to leave." Charles crossed his arms, studying her. "That's not something children do to just anyone, especially not my children. Since their mother died, they haven't connected with anyone. They have rejected 8 nannies in 2 years. Mrs. Halloway assured me that they were fine, that they just needed time." "The children are fine," Grace replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "They are wonderful children, sir. Intelligent, loving, but they weren't well before you arrived, were they?" Grace remained silent. Her eyes returned to the ground, and Charles saw her lightly bite her lower lip, as if she were torn between loyalty to her employer and the truth. "Grace," said Charles, softening his tone even more, "I'm not interrogating you. You're not in trouble. I just need to know what's been happening at my house. I need to know how it's possible that an employee who has only been here for 3 months has managed to make my children smile again." She slowly raised her gaze, and Charles saw tears held back in those honey-colored eyes. "They just needed someone to see them, sir," Grace whispered. "Children always know when someone truly sees them, not as a chore or an obligation, but as little people who feel and have needs. I lost my mother when I was 7. I know what it's like to grow up feeling like there's a void no one can fill. So when Jack and Lily started looking for me, I was simply there." Charles felt a squeezing in his chest. This 20-year-old girl, with her worn uniform and hardworking hands, had just expressed in a few words something he, with all his university degrees and business experience, hadn't been able to grasp. His children didn't need luxuries. They didn't need expensive toys from Hamleys or exotic vacations. They needed to be seen. "Where did you learn that?" Charles asked, genuinely impressed. Grace smiled sadly. "Life teaches more than any book, Mr. Sterling." Just then, Mrs. Halloway stormed into the room. Her usually stern expression turned to shock when she saw Charles standing next to Grace. "Mr. Sterling, we didn't know you had arrived. No one notified us. If only we had known." His gaze slid toward Grace, and Charles couldn't ignore the flash of disapproval that crossed his eyes. "Grace, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the kitchen helping with dinner." "Grace was looking after my children," Charles interrupted firmly, And apparently she's been doing a very good job during my absence. Mrs. Halloway blinked, clearly disconcerted by her employer's protective tone. Yes. Well, the children have grown fond of her, but we didn't want to bother you with such trivial details while you were busy with important business. Trivial. That word hung in the air like a sentence. Charles looked at Mrs. Halloway, really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time in years, he saw a 60-year-old woman who was efficient and organized, but with a rigidity in her gestures that he had never noticed before. How had he overlooked so many things? Mrs. Halloway, I need you to prepare a complete report of all the staff for me tomorrow, Charles said, maintaining his neutral voice. I want to know exactly who does what in this house, when, and how. Of course, sir. Is there a problem? No problem at all. I just want to be more involved. Mrs. Halloway nodded, though something about her posture tensed. She looked at Grace with an expression Charles couldn't decipher. Grace, to the kitchen. Now then, Mrs. Halloway. Grace gave Charles a small bow. Excuse me, sir. As the young woman hurried out of the room, Charles couldn't help but notice how she hunched her shoulders slightly, as if she shrank in Halloway's presence. And in that instant, Charles Sterling made a decision. He would find out exactly what was happening in his house. Because that afternoon, upon returning unexpectedly, he hadn't just found his children asleep in the arms of a stranger. He had found the first piece of a puzzle that he sensed would change everything. For the next 3 days, Charles Sterling did something he hadn't done in years. He observed. Not from his office upstairs, not through phone calls where Mrs. Halloway went to ask how the children were. He observed from within like a silent ghost, wandering his own house, uncovering secrets that had always been there waiting to be seen. The first day he got up early, long before the sun painted the horizon pink over London. He went down to the kitchen, barefoot, still in his pajamas, something he never did. And there he found her. Grace was standing with her back to the door, on tiptoe in front of the top cupboard, stretching her small frame to reach a box of cereal. She was wearing the same blue and white uniform, impeccably ironed despite the early hour. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid that fell down her back. Good morning, Charles said from the doorway. Grace jumped and almost dropped the box. She turned sharply, clutching her chest. Mr. Sterling, no, I didn't hear you come down. Do you need something? I can make you coffee immediately or just... Coffee. All right, thank you. Charles sat down on one of the benches on the central kitchen island, a place he had never sat before. Do you always get up so early? Yes, sir, at 5:30. Grace moved efficiently around the kitchen, preparing the coffee maker. I like to have everything ready before the children wake up. And where do you have breakfast? The question seemed to catch her off guard. There was a barely perceptible pause before answering. In my room, sir, or sometimes here in the kitchen when I finish my morning chores. You don't have breakfast with the rest of the staff? Another awkward silence. Sometimes, Mr. Sterling. Charles said nothing more, but he kept that information like a piece of a puzzle that he was just beginning to put together. He watched as Grace moved around the kitchen with the familiarity of someone who knows every corner, every drawer, every secret of that space. Her movements were precise, almost choreographed, the result of months of repeating the same task over and over again. When she served him the coffee, her hands were trembling slightly. Do you have a family, Grace? Charles asked, taking the steaming cup. She hesitated as if she were calculating how much she should reveal. A brother, Mr. Sterling. Thomas. He is 16 years old and lives in Yorkshire with my aunt. And your parents? My mother passed away when I was 7 years old. My father is not present. The way she said those last words, with a coldness that contrasted with the warmth she showed towards his children, told Charles everything he needed to know. There were stories there, wounds that would probably never fully heal. Is your brother okay? Grace looked up, surprised by the question. For a moment, her mask of a professional employee cracked, and Charles saw the 20-year-old girl she really was, carrying the weight of the world on her thin shoulders. He's sick, sir. He has heart problems from birth. He needs constant medication and monthly checkups. That's why I work here. My salary allows me to send him money for his treatments. Charles nodded slowly, feeling that each word was another brick in the wall of respect he was building towards that young woman. At that moment, Mrs. Halloway entered the kitchen. Her expression hardened when she saw Charles sitting on the island, talking to Grace as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mr. Sterling, I didn't know you had come down. Grace, you shouldn't be cleaning the dining room. I was making coffee for Mr. Sterling, Grace replied quickly, looking down. I see. Okay, you can leave. I will take care of the master. Grace gave a small bow and hurried out of the kitchen. Charles couldn't help but notice how her shoulders tensed under Halloway's scrutiny. Mrs. Halloway, I want Grace to have breakfast in the dining room with the rest of the staff starting tomorrow. The governess blinked, clearly confused. Sir, Grace has a different schedule. She prefers... I'm not asking, Mrs. Halloway. It's an order. Something dark crossed the older woman's eyes, but she quickly disguised it with a professional smile. Of course, sir, as you say. On the second day, Charles decided to work from home. He set up his laptop in the study overlooking the back garden, from where he had a perfect view of the play area where Jack and Lily spent their afternoons. That's when he saw it. Around 3 p.m., his children went out to the garden with Grace. There was nobody else. Mrs. Halloway was not supervising. None of the other employees were there. Just Grace with the twins running around her like happy puppies. The young woman had brought them an old blanket and a basket of sandwiches. She organized an impromptu picnic under the large willow tree that Elizabeth had planted years before. Jack and Lily sat down next to her, and Charles watched, fascinated, as the girl told them some story that made them laugh, gesturing exaggeratedly, making funny voices. After the picnic, they played hide and seek. Grace covered her eyes and counted to 10, while the children ran to hide behind the bushes. When she found them, she would feign exaggerated surprise, which made them burst out laughing. Later, when the sun began to set, Grace took paper and crayons out of the basket, and the three of them sat down to draw. Charles approached the window, wanting to see better, and what he saw broke his heart. Lily had drawn a family, a tall man in a suit, 2 small children, and in the middle a woman in a blue dress with a braid. Grace pointed at the drawing tenderly while Lily animatedly explained every detail. Jack, for his part, had drawn a giant heart with 4 names clumsily written on it. Daddy, Jack, Lily, and Grace. Grace. Charles felt a lump in his throat. His children had found a maternal figure in a domestic worker who earned barely enough to survive and support a sick brother. And he, with all his wealth and power, had failed to see that his little ones were starved for affection. It was at that moment that he heard the voices. They came from the side corridor near the kitchen. Charles recognized Mrs. Halloway's voice as tense and annoyed. You're going too far, girl. You're not a nanny. You're a cleaning lady. Your job does not include playing at being the mother of those children. They're the only ones who look over Mrs. Halloway. I can't refuse them when... Of course you can, and you should. Mr. Sterling has been paying too much attention to you lately, and I don't like that at all. Girls like you are always looking to climb the ladder by taking advantage of rich widowed men. I would never do something like that. Oh no? So why do you fall asleep on the living room sofa with the children? Why do you let them call you Grace, as if you were a part of the family? Because what they need is for you to do your job and stop filling their heads with fantasies. Their mother died. That's not going to change, and you're not her replacement. The silence that followed was devastating. Charles clenched his fists, feeling the rage boil in his chest. He headed toward the hallway, ready to intervene when he heard Grace's broken voice. You're right, Mrs. Halloway. Excuse me. It won't happen again. Hurried steps. Grace walked past the studio without seeing it, her head down and her shoulders hunched. Charles caught a glimpse of the glimmer of tears on her cheeks before she disappeared up the service staircase. Mrs. Halloway appeared moments later and froze when she encountered Charles in the middle of the hallway. Mr. Sterling, how long have you been talking to Grace like that? The governess paled. Sir, I was just setting boundaries. That girl is taking liberties, Charles interrupted in an icy voice. She's the only person in this house who has managed to make my children smile again. Did you know that, Mrs. Halloway? Or have you been so busy setting boundaries that you didn't notice Jack and Lily were dying of sadness? Sir, the children are fine. They just need discipline and routine, not a domestic worker playing at being their mother. And what have you been doing for them these past 2 years? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like absolutely nothing. Mrs. Halloway opened her mouth to answer, but Charles raised a hand. I want you to bring me the complete house accounts for the last 6 months tomorrow morning. Every expense, every purchase, every pound that has come in and gone out. The accounts, sir? I've always been meticulous with them. I want them on my desk at 8 a.m. without fail. Mrs. Halloway's face contorted in something resembling fear, but she quickly disguised it with indignation. As you command, sir. When Mrs. Halloway left, Charles remained in the hallway with his breathing rapid and his heart beating strongly. Something didn't add up. Halloway's hostility towards Grace was disproportionate, almost personal, and that insistence on reviewing the accounts had provoked a reaction that did not go unnoticed. Charles Sterling had not built a business empire by being naive. He knew the signs of deception, guilt, fear, and they were all written on the face of his trusted governess. That night, after putting Jack and Lily to bed, Charles locked himself in his office and turned on his computer. The mansion had a security camera system installed years ago after an attempted robbery in the neighborhood. Mrs. Halloway had insisted that they were not necessary inside the house, only on the outside perimeter. Charles had never told her that he had also installed cameras in the indoor common areas. He began reviewing the recordings from the last 3 months since Grace had been hired. What he saw in the next 4 hours chilled him to the bone. In a recording from the staff dining room, Grace was eating alone in a corner while the rest of the team chatted at the main table. Nobody spoke to her, nobody included her. In another clip from the kitchen hallway, Halloway was scolding Grace for something trivial, pointing her finger at her while the young woman kept her head down. But the worst came later. Charles found a recording from the pantry dated 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Halloway came in with a large box and began taking out products: cans of preserves, packets of coffee, bottles of premium olive oil from Fortnum and Mason. She methodically put them in the box, glancing towards the door every few seconds. Then came another recording, this time of the main living room. Mrs. Halloway wrapped an antique porcelain vase in newspaper and put it in a bag, a vase that Elizabeth had bought in Paris. There were more, many more. Charles felt that the anger was being replaced by something colder, more dangerous, the absolute certainty of betrayal. But what finally made him explode was a recording from the children's playroom dated 6 weeks earlier at 2 a.m. Jack was weeping inconsolably in his bed. Lily was also restless in the bed next door. Mrs. Halloway entered the room and Charles waited to see her comforting the little ones. Instead, he saw her approaching with an irritated expression. Enough is enough. Your mother isn't coming back no matter how much you cry. Go to sleep right now or I'll take away your toys. The children cried louder, terrified. Mrs. Halloway turned off the light and slammed the door shut. Charles had to look away from the screen. Tears burned his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure fury. His children, his babies, had been suffering, and he hadn't known anything. He continued reviewing, moving quickly until he found the date Grace was hired. And then he saw something that changed his perspective on everything. It was night. Jack and Lily were crying again in their beds, but this time it wasn't Mrs. Halloway who came in. It was Grace. The young woman was wearing her pajamas, an old t-shirt and worn cotton pants. She had clearly woken up to the crying. She approached the children's beds and sat down between them. "Shh, my loves, calm down," she whispered, stroking both of their heads. "I'm here, you're not alone. We miss Mummy." Lily sobbed. "I know, my love, and it's okay to miss her. It's okay to cry. But your Mummy wouldn't want to see you so sad. She would want you to be happy, to play, to laugh." "Do you miss your Mummy too?" Jack asked, his voice trembling. "Every day of my life," Grace admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "But do you know what helps me? Remembering the good things, the songs she sang to me, the hugs she gave me, how her hair smelled. Those memories are treasures that no one can take away from us." "Will you sing us the song?" Lily asked. And Grace sang, the same song that Elizabeth used to sing, the same one she had hummed in her sleep on the sofa days before. Her voice was soft, sweet, full of a love that couldn't be faked. The children calmed down. Grace stayed with them until they fell asleep and then stayed a while longer, simply watching over them. Charles stopped the video and put his hands to his face. He cried. He cried for the first time since Elizabeth's funeral. He wept for his children, for the lost time, for not having seen what was happening in his own home. But above all, he wept with gratitude toward a 20-year-old girl who, without asking for anything in return, had done for his children what he hadn't known how to do: love them unconditionally. When he finally calmed down, Charles knew exactly what he had to do. He opened his laptop and began writing an email to his personal solicitor. He attached all the compromising videos of Mrs. Halloway. Then he called his head of security. "Robert, I need you to come first thing tomorrow. Bring 2 of your men. You're going to see some important changes in the house." After hanging up, Charles looked out the window toward the servants' quarters where Grace was probably sleeping at that moment, unaware that her life was about to change forever. And in the darkness of his office, Charles Sterling smiled for the first time in a long time. Justice would arrive in the morning. At 7 a.m., the Sterling mansion awoke to the tense silence that precedes a storm. Charles hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night reviewing every second of video footage, every suspicious bank transaction he'd found in the house's digital files, every tiny inconsistency he'd ignored for years because of his blind trust in Mrs. Halloway. And what he discovered was far worse than he'd imagined. It wasn't just the systematic theft of pantry items and valuables. It wasn't just the psychological abuse of his children. There was something darker, more calculated, more personal. In a recording from the staff dining room, dated just a week after Grace was hired, Charles watched Mrs. Halloway talking to the other employees while Grace cleaned in the hallway, clearly out of earshot. "That girl won't last long here," Mrs. Halloway said disdainfully. "She's too pretty, too young. Those like her always have plans. Keep a close eye on her and don't get attached." Another employee, Mrs. Hudson, the cook who had been with the house for 10 years, had responded uncomfortably. "Mrs. Halloway, Grace, she seems like a good girl. She works hard. And that's precisely why we have to be careful," Mrs. Halloway interrupted. "The ones who seem innocent are the worst. Trust me, I have years of experience." Charles had seen how Mrs. Halloway had systematically poisoned the rest of the staff against Grace. Subtle comments here, disapproving looks there, deliberate exclusions from meals and conversations, all designed to isolate the young woman, to make her feel like she didn't belong, that she was alone. But why? The answer came in an older recording from almost 4 months prior, just before Grace was hired. Charles had been out of the country closing a deal in Brazil. In the video, Mrs. Halloway was speaking on the phone in the privacy of her office, unaware that the security camera in the adjacent hallway was capturing both audio and video. "No, I can't keep doing this," Mrs. Halloway said, her voice strained. "He's pressuring me to bring him more things. I've already taken too much from the house. If Mr. Sterling checks the accounts..." A pause followed as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. "He's my son. I understand, but this is theft. I could go to jail." Another pause. "How much more do you need to pay off your debts? I already gave you almost £30,000 worth of merchandise." Charles had frozen the video at that point, processing the information. Mrs. Halloway's son, he had heard vague mentions of him over the years, a middle-aged man with a gambling addiction who constantly needed money. Charles had even lent Mrs. Halloway money a couple of times for family emergencies. Now it all made sense. Mrs. Halloway wasn't stealing out of greed. She was desperate, caught between her loyalty to her employer and her love for a son who was dragging her into the abyss. But that didn't justify what she had done to his children. That didn't justify how she had treated Grace. At 7:30, Robert arrived with 2 of his men. Charles received them in his study and explained the situation in a controlled but firm voice. He showed them the most incriminating videos. "I want this handled discreetly, but firmly," he instructed. "No unnecessary scandals. The children can't see any of this." "Do you want to press charges, Mr. Sterling?" Robert asked. Charles thought about it for a long moment. Part of him wanted to see Mrs. Halloway pay for every tear his children had shed, for every night they had cried while she ignored them or yelled at them. But another part, the part that remembered the efficient woman she once was, who had served his family for 15 years before everything fell apart, felt a deep sorrow. First, I want to hear what she has to say, he finally replied. Then we'll decide. At 8 o'clock, Mrs. Halloway knocked on the study door. She was carrying a folder with the accounts Charles had requested. Her expression was tense, but controlled, the mask of professionalism she had perfected over decades. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Here are the accounts you requested. Everything is in order, as always. Sit down, Mrs. Halloway. Something in Charles's tone made the mask crack slightly. Mrs. Halloway sat in the chair in front of the desk, the folder pressed tightly against her chest like a shield. Is there a problem, sir? Charles turned his laptop screen toward her. On the frozen screen was the image of Mrs. Halloway taking products from the pantry and putting them in a box. The color disappeared from the housekeeper's face. Sir, I can explain. I hope you can, Charles replied in an icy voice, because I've spent all night reviewing the security footage from the last 6 months. Do you want me to show you more? I have dozens. Mrs. Halloway opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her hands were visibly trembling. How much? Charles asked. How much have you stolen from this house? Tears began to stream down the woman's cheeks. The folder fell to the floor, scattering papers everywhere. I don't know, she whispered. No, my son wasn't keeping track. He has debts, sir, gambling debts. Dangerous people were threatening him. I just wanted to help him, protect him. And you thought the way to protect him was by stealing from me? I didn't know what else to do, Mrs. Halloway burst out, bringing her hands to her face. I had already lent him all my savings. You had helped me twice. I couldn't keep asking. I thought if I only took small things you wouldn't notice. Small things, a vase that cost £20,000 is small. The porcelain my wife collected is small. I'm sorry, Mrs. Halloway sobbed. I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling. I never meant to. You have been so good to me all these years, me and my children. Charles's voice hardened even more. They were just a little something you could ignore? Mrs. Halloway looked up, confused through her tears. What? Charles pressed another button, and the video changed. It now showed the scene in the children's room with Mrs. Halloway yelling at them that their mother wasn't coming back. Horror spread across the governess's face as she watched her own cruelty played back in high definition. No, not me. They drove me crazy, she murmured. They cried every night. I was so stressed about my son's situation and they wouldn't stop crying. And me. You mistreated them, Charles finished. You ignored them when they needed you most. You yelled at them. You scared them. You made them feel like a burden. They were 3-year-old children who had just lost their mother, Mrs. Halloway. How could you? I don't know what to say, she whispered, sinking into her chair. You're right. There's no excuse for what I did. I lost control of my life, of everything. There was a long silence. Charles watched the woman he had once considered trustworthy, now reduced to a pathetic figure, consumed by shame and regret. And Grace? Charles asked after a moment. Why did you treat her like that? Mrs. Halloway closed her eyes. Because she was everything I wasn't being. She was young, patient, loving with the children. I saw how Jack and Lily lit up when she was around. I saw how they sought her out, how they called for her when they were scared. And I realized that I had failed, not only as an employee, but as a human being. So you punished her for your own failure? Yes, Mrs. Halloway admitted, her voice breaking, and it was cruel and unfair. She never did anything to me. She was just trying to do her job and take care of the children because no one else would, and I made her feel like she was wrong. Charles leaned back in his chair, processing everything. Part of him wanted to yell at her, fire her immediately, call the police. But another part, the part that had learned Elizabeth's desire to seek compassion, even in the darkest moments, stopped him. Where is your son now? Mrs. Halloway looked at him in surprise. He's in rehab. He finally agreed to go 2 weeks ago. I sold my car to pay for the program, and the debts are still there. But at least he's no longer in immediate danger. Charles nodded slowly, making a decision he knew would change everything. I'm going to do something, Mrs. Halloway, not because you deserve it, but because my wife taught me that compassion is sometimes more powerful than justice. I'm going to pay your son's debts and pay for his entire rehab treatment. Mrs. Holloway's eyes widened in disbelief. Sir, I can't accept. You haven't finished listening, Charles interrupted. I'll do it on two conditions. First, you're going to make a complete list of everything you stole, every item, every product, its approximate value, and you're going to return everything you still have. Anything you've already sold will deduct from your settlement. Mrs. Holloway nodded vigorously, still crying. Second condition, you resign today immediately. You leave this house and you never return. There will be no criminal charges, no scandal, but there will also be no second chances. Understood? Yes, Mrs. Holloway whispered. Yes, sir. It's more than I deserve. Much more, Charles agreed, but it's also the right thing to do. You have 1 hour to gather your things from your room. Robert and his men will escort you. Mrs. Holloway stood, her legs trembling. Before leaving, she turned to Charles one last time. Mr. Sterling, Grace is a good girl, an exceptional girl. Please take care of her and the children. They deserve all the happiness in the world. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. Charles didn't reply. He simply watched as Mrs. Holloway left the study, her figure hunched over, carrying the weight of her mistakes. When the door closed, Charles allowed himself a deep breath. Robert entered moments later. Do you want me to make sure she leaves without incident? Yes, and Robert, be discreet. I don't want the children to see any of this, especially Grace, Miss Grace. Why, what about her? Charles smiled slightly. Because she deserves a peaceful day. After everything she's endured, she deserves at least that. After Robert left, Charles called his solicitor. Mauricio, I need you to prepare an employment contract. Yes, today, it's urgent. He hung up and looked out the window at the garden, where sometime that morning, Grace would be playing with his children, unaware that her life was about to change completely. And for the first time since Elizabeth's death, Charles Sterling felt he was doing the right thing, that he was honoring his wife's memory by protecting someone who deserved it. Justice had been served, but the best was yet to come. Around 10 a.m., when Mrs. Holloway had already left with her belongings and a folder containing the details of the agreement they had just signed, Charles gathered the rest of the staff in the dining room. Mrs. Hudson, the cook, Robert, the gardener, Anne-Marie, the other cleaning lady. They all looked confused and worried. Where is Mrs. Holloway? Mrs. Hudson asked. Mrs. Holloway no longer works here, Charles announced firmly. She has resigned for personal reasons. From now on, there will be significant changes in how this house operates. He scanned their face, searching for signs of complicity or guilt. What he found was mostly relief. I know some of you were pressured to mistreat Grace, Charles continued. I know that Mrs. Holloway created a hostile environment for her. That ends today. Grace is now a fully fledged employee with the same rights and respect as any of you. Is that clear? Yes, sir, they answered in unison. Mrs. Hudson, where is Grace now? In the nursery, sir. She's playing with Jack and Lily. Charles nodded. Good. When she's finished with them, have her come to my study. I need to talk to her. What Charles didn't know was that Grace, at that very moment, was in the nursery, crying silently while Jack and Lily napped. She was mentally packing, preparing for the dismissal, which she was sure would come after all the trouble her presence had caused. She had no idea that her life was about to truly begin. Grace looked at herself in the small, cracked mirror in her room and wiped her tears with the back of her hand. The moment had arrived. Mrs. Hudson had told her that Mr. Sterling wanted to see her in his study. The words sounded like a death sentence. Grace knew that tone. She had heard those words before. In other jobs, in other houses where she had lasted only weeks before being fired for reasons she never quite understood. This time she did understand. She had crossed an invisible line, grown too attached to the children. She had forgotten her place, and now she would pay the price. With trembling hands, she smoothed down her uniform and made sure her braid was perfect. At least she would leave with dignity. At least she would have that. She walked down the long hallway toward Mr. Sterling's study with steps that felt like they were leading her to the gallows. Every meter was a memory. Here, Jack had learned to do a handstand with her help. There, Lily had spilled orange juice, and they had cleaned up together, laughing. This house had become a home for her in just 3 months, and now she would have to leave it. She knocked on the study door, her knuckles barely touching the wood, as if afraid that a louder knock might hasten the inevitable. "Come in." Charles was standing by the window looking out at the garden. He didn't turn when she entered. Grace stood by the door, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. "Close the door, please," Charles said without turning around. Grace obeyed, feeling her heart pound so loudly that she was sure he could hear her. "Sit down." "I'd rather stand, sir, if you don't mind." Charles finally turned and looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that Grace couldn't quite place. Disappointment, anger, sorrow. "Do you know why I called you?" Grace swallowed. Better to be direct, she thought. Better to say it before he had to. "Yes, sir. I understand I have to go. I know I took liberties that weren't mine to take. The children, they sought me out, and I didn't know how to maintain the professional distance I should have. Mrs. Halloway was right. I'm not a nanny. I'm a cleaning lady, and I forgot my place." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling. I swear I never intended to." Charles interrupted, taking a step toward her. "To love my children?" Grace looked up sharply, surprised by the question. "I didn't intend to take care of them when no one else would, to comfort them when they cried, to be the only person in this house who treated them like what they are, children who need love." Tears began to stream down Grace's cheeks. "Sir, I never meant to cause any trouble. They just reminded me of myself when I was little, when my mother died and no one knew how to talk to me, how to touch me, as if my pain were contagious. I just wanted Jack and Lily to know that someone saw them, that someone loved them." "I know, Grace," Charles finished, his voice cracking slightly. "I saw it. I saw everything, Grace. I need to..." She blinked, confused. "What did you see?" Charles walked to his desk and turned his laptop screen toward her. On the screen was a freeze frame, Grace sitting between Jack and Lily's beds in the middle of the night, singing them a lullaby. "There are security cameras throughout the house," Charles explained gently. "I installed them years ago and never mentioned them. Last night I reviewed 3 months of recordings." Horror was painted on Grace's face. What else had he seen? How many times had he seen her playing with the children when she should have been working? How many times had he seen her hug them, kiss their foreheads, treat them as if they were her own? "Sir, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything," Charles interrupted. He approached her and, to Grace's surprise, took her hands in his. "Grace, I didn't call you to say goodbye. I called you to thank you." Grace looked at him without understanding, tears blurring her vision. "Thank me? I also saw what Mrs. Halloway did to you. I saw how she treated you, how she isolated you, how she humiliated you day after day. I saw how the rest of the staff ignored you on her orders. I saw your room, Grace. I saw that thin mattress on the floor, that unheated room where one person could barely fit. I saw how you eat alone, how you get up at 5:30 in the morning and then work until after 10 at night." "That's my job, sir," Grace whispered. "No," Charles replied firmly. "That was your abuse, and I allowed it because I wasn't paying attention, because I was too immersed in my own pain to see what was happening in my own home." He let go of Grace's hands and walked back to the desk. He took a folder and handed it to her. "What is this?" Grace asked, not daring to pick it up. "A contract. I want you to be Jack and Lily's official caregiver, not a cleaning lady, not a temporary nanny. Their caregiver, their guardian, the person responsible for their emotional and physical well-being when I am not around." Grace took the folder with the trembling hands and opened it. Her eyes widened when she saw the numbers written there. "Sir, this salary is 3 times what I earn now. I cannot accept." "It's less than you deserve," Charles interrupted. "In addition, it also includes full medical insurance, paid vacation, Christmas bonus, and savings fund. I have also arranged for your brother Thomas to be transferred to one of the best cardiologists in London on Harley Street. All his medical expenses will be covered." Grace felt her legs give way. She slumped down into the nearest chair, unable to process what she was hearing. "My brother? How do you know about my brother?" You told me the other day in the kitchen, Charles replied with a gentle smile. And last night I made some calls. Dr. Ramirez is the best in his field. He already reviewed Thomas's case. He says that with the right treatment, your brother can lead a completely normal life. Grace's tears turned into sobs. She covered her face with her hands, unable to contain the emotion that overwhelmed her. I don't understand why you're doing this for me. Charles knelt in front of her, lowering his gaze to Grace's level. Because in 3 months you gave my children what I couldn't give them in 2 years. The certainty that they are not alone, that they are loved, that they're in life after loss. Because I saw you in those recordings singing to them at 3 in the morning, without anyone asking you to, without expecting anything in return, anything. Because you wiped their tears with your own hands, even though you yourself were fighting your own demons. They saved me too, Grace admitted between sobs. When I arrived here, I was so lost, Mr. Sterling. I worked in homes where I was treated as if I were invisible. I sent all my money to Yorkshire for Thomas's medicine and lived off scraps. I slept in rooms without windows where I could barely breathe. And then I arrived here and met Jack and Lily. And for the first time in years, for the first time I felt that I had a purpose, that my life meant something. Your life means a lot, Charles said in a firm voice. And I want you to know something else, Grace. Mrs. Halloway no longer works here. She left this morning. Grace looked up abruptly. She left? Because? Charles stood up and returned to his desk. He told her everything, carefully but without omitting important details. Systematic theft, mistreatment of children, manipulation of the rest of the staff. Grace listened in silence, her eyes growing ever wider. All this time I thought she was right, Grace whispered when Charles finished. I thought I was the problem, that I didn't deserve to be near the children. She manipulated you because she was afraid, Charles explained. Fear that what she was doing would be discovered. Fear that someone would realize she wasn't doing her job. And you, with your kindness and dedication, were a threat to her. What's going to happen to her? I paid off her son's debts and his rehabilitation treatment. She made a list of everything she stole, and we agreed not to press charges. She left this morning. Grace nodded slowly, processing all the information. She looked again at the contract in her hands, the words dancing on the page through her tears. There's one more thing, Charles added. You'll be moving to a room in the main wing of the house next to the children's room. It's bigger, has its own bathroom, heating, and a garden view. I already asked them to move your things this afternoon. Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Charles replied with a genuine smile. Say you accept. Say that you will stay with us, that you will continue to take care of Jack and Lily as only you know how. Grace stood up with trembling legs. She looked Charles in the eyes, at that man she barely knew, but who had just changed her life with an act of kindness she would never forget. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I accept, and I promise you, Mr. Sterling, that I will take care of your children as if they were my own. I will give them all the love I have. I will never disappoint you. I know, Charles replied. That's why I chose you. At that moment, the studio door burst open and Jack and Lily rushed in with Mrs. Hudson chasing them unsuccessfully. Excuse me, Mr. Sterling. They slipped out when they woke up from their nap. Grace, Lily shouted, throwing herself into the young woman's arms. Mrs. Hudson said you were here with Daddy. Why are you crying? Are you sad? Jack also hugged her, looking at her with concern. Don't cry, okay? We don't like it when you cry. Grace hugged them tightly, laughing and crying at the same time. I'm not sad, my loves. I'm happy. Very, very happy. Because? Jack asked. Grace looked at Charles, who nodded with a smile. Because I'm going to stay with you forever. The children's shouts of joy filled the studio. They clung to Grace as if they were afraid she would disappear if they let go of her arm. Charles watched the scene with a lump in his throat, feeling something in his chest, something that had been broken for a long time, begin to heal. Mrs. Hudson wiped her tears from the doorway and murmured a "Thank you, Lord," before discreetly withdrawing. When the children finally calmed down, Lily looked at her father with her big eyes full of hope. Daddy, This means that Grace will always live here as part of the family? Charles looked at Grace, who was holding his children with a tenderness that broke his heart. He thought of Elizabeth, and how she had loved those children, and how she had made him promise that he would always put them first. And he knew with absolute certainty that this was the way to fulfill that promise. Yes, my love, Charles replied. Grace is part of this family now, and always will be. Jack and Lily shouted with joy again, and Grace closed her eyes, letting that moment be forever etched in her heart. She had arrived at that house as an invisible employee, a poor girl without hope or future. And now, for the first time in her life, she had a home. She had a family, and most incredible of all, she had the certainty that she deserved it all. That night, as Grace arranged her few belongings in her new room, a beautiful suite with windows overlooking the moonlit garden, she couldn't help but think about her mother. We did it, Mom, she whispered to the starry sky. I've finally found my place in the world. And somewhere in the infinite mystery of the universe, a mother smiled proudly at the woman her little girl had become. Across the hall, Charles tucked Jack and Lily into their beds. The children couldn't stop talking about their day, about how Grace would stay forever, about how they now had a complete family again. When they finally fell asleep, Charles watched them for a long time. And for the first time since Elizabeth's death, he felt peace. He had found a way to honor her memory, not by forgetting her, but by opening his heart to someone who loved his children as much as she had. And although he still didn't dare admit it, not even to himself, Charles knew that something else was beginning to grow in his heart, something that had the sweet face and honey-colored eyes of a young woman named Grace. The following months transformed the Sterling mansion in ways no one had anticipated. Grace embraced her new role with a naturalness that surprised even Charles. Mornings began with laughter instead of tears, with Jack and Lily running through the hallways to wake Grace before her alarm went off. Breakfast became family gatherings where the children shared their dreams and planned adventures for the day. Charles, who used to leave for the office at 6 a.m. to escape the silence of the house, now found himself delaying his departure just to hear one more story, to see one more smile, to witness the magic Grace wove into his children's lives. But there was something more, something that grew silently in the spaces between daily routines, in the glances exchanged when the children weren't looking, in the conversations that lingered after Jack and Lily had gone to sleep. One December afternoon, as the first Christmas decorations began to appear around London, Charles returned home early from work. He had closed an important deal, one that would give him the financial freedom to reduce his office hours and spend more time at home. He wanted to share the news with someone, and he was surprised to realize that the first person he thought of wasn't his business partner or his sister. It was Grace. He found her in the backyard, sitting under the willow tree with a laptop on her lap. Jack and Lily were playing nearby, building a fort out of cardboard boxes and old sheets. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so full of life, that Charles paused in the doorway just to commit it to memory. Grace looked up and smiled at him. That smile, that simple gesture, stirred something in Charles's chest. "You're early," she said, closing her laptop. "The kids will be thrilled." "What were you doing?" Charles asked, walking over and sitting down on the grass beside her. Grace hesitated, biting her lower lip in that gesture Charles had learned to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Studying," she finally admitted. "I enrolled in an online pedagogy course. I figured if I'm going to be taking care of Jack and Lily, I should do it the best way possible. Learning about child development, psychology, early childhood education." He looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. "When do you study? You're already working all day with the children." "At night," Grace replied with a shy smile. "After everyone's asleep, just a couple of hours, it's not that much." "Grace, I know you work hard. You should rest more." "I know, but I never had the chance to study, Mr. Sterling. I've had to work since I was 15. And now, with the salary you pay me, I can afford these online courses. And it makes me happy. It makes me feel like I'm growing, that I'm becoming a better person for them." Charles felt something deep and moving in her words. Here was a 20-year-old who had had every reason in the world to become bitter and resentful, choosing instead to grow, to learn, to improve. "Why do you still call me Mr. Sterling?" he asked suddenly. "After all these months, after everything we've shared, you can call me Charles." Grace looked at him in surprise. a light blush tinging her cheeks. I didn't know if it was appropriate. You are part of this family, Grace, not my employee, not just my children's nanny. You're one of us, and I'd like you to call me by my name. There was a moment of meaningful silence. Grace looked into his eyes, and Charles saw something there that made his heart beat faster. Something he hadn't seen in a long time. Something that frightened and thrilled him in equal measure. Okay, Charles, she said gently, testing his name as if it were something precious and fragile. Daddy! Lily's shout broke the moment. Come and see our castle. It's huge. Charles stood up and held out his hand to help Grace to her feet. When their fingers touched, neither of them was quick to let go. Weeks passed, and Christmas arrived with its usual magic. Grace insisted on decorating the house herself with the children, creating homemade ornaments and baking cookies shaped like stars and trees. Charles watched from afar, marveling at how she had brought Bree back to a house that had been shrouded in darkness for so long. On Christmas Eve, after Jack and Lily had fallen asleep waiting for Santa Claus, Charles and Grace sat together in the living room drinking hot chocolate and watching the tree lights twinkle in the darkness. My mother used to do this, Grace said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Sitting with me on Christmas Eve after Thomas fell asleep, she would tell me stories from when she was a little girl, how her mother taught her to find magic in the small things. She sounds like a wonderful woman. She was, Grace replied with a sad smile. She died too young. Elizabeth was 32 when cancer took her. Sometimes I wonder, what would she say if she could see me now, here in this life I never dreamed of having? She would tell you she's proud of you, Charles stated without hesitation. She would tell you that you raised your brother well despite everything. She would tell you that you are an extraordinary woman. Grace looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. Do you think I'm extraordinary? I know you are. The moment stretched out, heavy with unspoken words. Charles leaned slightly toward her, and Grace didn't move away. Their faces were inches apart when the sound of small footsteps on the stairs made them abruptly separate. Jack appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. I can't sleep. Santa's already here? Grace stood up quickly, composing her expression. Not yet, my love. Santa comes when all the children are asleep. Come, I'll take you back to bed. Charles watched as Grace lifted Jack in her arms and carried him upstairs, singing softly to him. And in that moment, with absolute clarity, he knew what he felt. He had fallen in love with her. He didn't know exactly when it had happened. Perhaps it had been that first afternoon when he found her asleep with his children on the sofa. Perhaps it had been during family dinners when their laughter filled the dining room. Perhaps it had been in the small moments when she asked him how his day had been, when their fingers brushed as they passed a plate, when he saw her reading stories in funny voices, until the children fell asleep. Or perhaps it had been all of it together, accumulating day after day, until it became this absolute certainty that now filled him completely. He was in love with Grace, but what would he do with that knowledge? She was 20 years younger than him. She had started as his employee. Would it even be fair to tell her how he felt? What if she felt pressured? What if it ruined the perfect dynamic they had built? For the next few days, Charles struggled with himself. He tried to convince himself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for what she had done for his children. But every time Grace entered a room, every time he heard her laugh, every time their eyes met and she smiled at him, he knew he was lying. It was an afternoon in January, while he was reviewing papers in his study, when Grace knocked on the door. May I come in? She asked shyly. Any time, Charles replied, pushing the documents aside. Grace came in and closed the door behind her. There was something different about her posture, something nervous in the way she wrung her hands. Is everything all right, Ma? Charles asked, standing up. I need to tell you something, and I don't know how. Charles's heart raced. Was she going to give up? Had she met someone? Had she realized she deserved more than this house could offer her? You can tell me anything, Grace. She took a deep breath, as if she were preparing to jump out of a cliff. I've been feeling things I shouldn't be feeling, and I know it's probably inappropriate and wrong, and I'll completely understand if you want me to leave. What do you feel? Charles asked, not daring to breathe. Grace looked up, and in her honey-colored eyes, she shone with utter vulnerability. When you're near, my heart beats faster. When I see you playing with Jack and Lily, something in my chest warms up. When you talk about your wife, about how much you loved her, I wish I could be worthy of that kind of love someday." She took another step toward him, tears beginning to stream down her cheeks. "I know you're my boss. I know there's an age difference. I know you'll probably never see me that way, but I needed to tell you that I've fallen in love with you, Charles. And if that means I have to leave, I'll understand. But I couldn't keep this secret any longer." The silence that followed was endless. Charles closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He took Grace's face in his hands and looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Do you know when I realized I was in love with you?" he whispered. "It was Christmas Eve when you walked away to take Jack to bed. I realized that every day that passed without telling you was a wasted day." "You are in love with me?" Grace asked madly, completely unsure. "I am in love with you," he confirmed, completely. And then he kissed her. It was a kiss, tender, full of everything they hadn't been able to say to each other for months. Grace clung to him as if she were afraid of waking up from a dream, and Charles held her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever held in his arms. When they separated, they were both crying and laughing at the same time. "You don't have to leave," Charles murmured against her forehead. "You never have to leave. Stay with me. Stay with us. Not as an employee, not as a nanny. Stay as my partner, my love, my family." "Are you sure?" Grace asked, still unable to believe it. "I'm not like your wife. I don't come from a wealthy background. I don't have a formal education. I don't know how to be the partner of a man like you." "You're exactly what I need," Charles replied firmly. "You're kind, strong, wise beyond your years. My children love you. I love you, and that's all that matters." Grace stood on tiptoe and kissed him again, pouring into that kiss all the gratitude, love, and hope she felt. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, you saw, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And somewhere in the universe, 2 souls who had left too soon, Grace's mother and Elizabeth, smiled, seeing that their loved ones had found love again. Because true love never dies, it only transforms, renews itself, finds new ways to bloom. And in the Sterling mansion, love was blooming again. The following months were like living in a dream from which neither of them wanted to awaken. Charles and Grace decided to take things slowly, not for lack of feeling, but out of respect for Jack and Lily. The children had already experienced enough changes in their short lives, and both adults agreed that they deserved stability above all else. But love has ways of seeping through even the most careful intentions. It began with small things, hands that brushed against each other while passing a plate during dinner and remained intertwined a second longer than necessary. Glances that met over the children's heads and lingered, silently communicating what words could not say before curious little ears. Late-night conversations on the terrace that stretched into the early hours, talking about everything and nothing, simply enjoying each other's company. One afternoon in March, while Grace was helping Jack with a puzzle in the playroom, Lily approached her father with a question that took him completely caught off guard. "Daddy, do you like Grace?" Charles looked up from the book he was reading, feeling the heat rise up his neck. "Of course I like her, my love. Grace is wonderful." "No," Lily insisted with that brutal clarity only children possess. "I mean, do you like her? Like when prince and princesses like each other in movies?" Charles glanced toward the playroom, where Grace was completely engrossed in helping Jack, oblivious to the conversation unfolding just a few feet away. "Why do you ask that, princess?" Lily shrugged with the innocence of her recently turned 5 years. "Because you look at her the way Daddy looked at Mummy in the photos, and because you smile a lot more now. And because Jack and I believe it would be nice if Grace were our real mum." Charles's heart stopped for a moment. He knelt in front of his daughter, taking her small hands in his own. "Grace would never replace your mum, my love. Your mum will always be your mum in your heart, in your memories." "I know," Lily replied with a seriousness uncharacteristic of her age. "But Mummy went to heaven and—" "Okay, Grace is here and she loves us very much, Daddy. I feel it when she hugs me, and you love her very much too. I see it when you look at her." Safan. Charles felt tears threatening to overflow. His little daughter, who had suffered so much, who had lost so much, was here giving him permission to be happy again. "And that would make you happy?" she asked in a trembling voice. "If Grace were more than just your caregiver, she would make us very happy," Lily replied, then called out toward the playroom. "Right, Jack?" Jack looked up from his puzzle. "Right? What? That we want Grace to be our mom?" Jack smiled broadly. "Yes, Grace is the best." Grace, who had heard everything, froze, clutching a puzzle piece in her hand. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the two children who had become her whole world. Charles approached her slowly. Jack and Lily watched with anticipation, as if they knew something important was about to happen. "Looks like we have the approval of the most important people," Charles said with a gentle smile. "Charles, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," he replied, taking her hand. "But I want you to know that what they just said is exactly what I've been feeling." That night, after putting the children to bed, Charles took Grace to the terrace where so many important conversations had taken place. The sky was clear, filled with stars that shone like diamonds over London. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Charles began, still holding her hand. "Regarding what this means, where we are headed." Grace felt her heart beating so strongly that she was sure he could hear it. "I too, Charles. I know that it has only been a few months since we confessed our feelings to each other. I know the world might judge us, say it's too soon, that the age difference matters, that we started in an unconventional way." "I don't care what the world says," Grace interrupted firmly. "You, Jack, and Lily are all that matter to me." Charles smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "That's why I love you, for that courage, that certainty, that ability to see beyond appearances and get straight to the heart of things." "Where do you want to go, Charles?" He took a deep breath. "I want you to move completely into the master bedroom, not as a caregiver living in the service wing, but as my partner, as an integral part of this family. I want Jack and Lily to know that they don't have to hide how much they love you, that they don't have to feel confused about what your place is here." Tears began to roll down Grace's cheeks. "You're sure? People will talk. They'll say I'm a gold digger, that I took advantage of your vulnerability, that I found love in the least expected place." "Let them talk," Charles finished. "Let them say that an extraordinary woman came into my life when I needed her most and taught me how to live again. That my children found a mother in someone who loves them unconditionally. That's what the people who matter will say. The rest can think whatever they want." Grace threw herself into his arms, crying against his chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm afraid this is too good to be true. I'm afraid of waking up and discovering that it was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Charles whispered, holding her tightly. "It's real, it's our life, and it's going to be beautiful." The transition was surprisingly natural. Grace moved her belongings to the master bedroom, although at first it seemed surreal to sleep in the same bed where Elizabeth had slept. Charles, noticing her discomfort, completely redesigned the space. "This is our room now," he told her as the decorators worked. "Not mine, not Elizabeth's, ours. I want you to choose the colors, the furniture, for it to be a space where we both feel at home." Grace chose warm tones, beiges and golds that made the room glow in the sunlight. They hung new photographs of the four of them together in the garden, laughing, of everyday moments that captured the happiness that now filled the house. The children adapted with an ease that touched both adults. One morning, Lily came running into the master bedroom shouting, "Mummy, Daddy, wake up!" And no one corrected her. Jack began referring to Grace as my mum Grace in conversations with his kindergarten friends. But not everything was perfect. One afternoon, while Grace was picking up the children from school, she overheard two mothers whispering near the parking lot. "It's the nanny, you know? She's barely 20 years old and she's already sleeping with the millionaire widower. Typical. Poor thing. The first wife barely dies and they've already replaced her with some random woman." Grace felt like every word was a stab wound. She kept her head high, took Jack in Lily's hands, and walked to the car without saying a word. But on the way home, tears threatened to spill over. That night, after putting the children to bed, she collapsed in Charles's arms. "Maybe they were right," she sobbed. "Maybe I am a gold digger. Maybe I don't deserve this. I was your employee, Charles. A domestic servant, uneducated, penniless, with nothing to offer you except love, Charles interrupted firmly, cupping her face in his hands. You offered love to me and my children. You offered us your time, your patience, your kindness. You gave us back our lives, Grace, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing shameful about that. But people will always talk. That's what insecure people do when they see others happy. But listen to me carefully. You are not a gold digger. You are the bravest and most genuine woman that I know. And if someone can't see that, that's their problem, not ours. Grace clung to him, letting his words heal the wounds the gossip had opened. I love you, she whispered against his chest. And I love you more than words can express. Months passed and life settled into a beautiful routine. Grace completed her pedagogy course with honors, and Charles organized a small celebration at home. Thomas, her brother, traveled from Yorkshire to visit them, and it was touching to see the 16-year-old, now healthy thanks to medical treatment, hug Charles with tears in his eyes. Thank you for taking care of my sister, Thomas told him, for seeing her as the incredible person she is. Your sister is the one who took care of us, Charles replied. I was just lucky enough to realize it in time. One afternoon in June, Charles arrived home earlier than usual. He found Grace in the garden, teaching Lily how to make flower crowns, while Jack was trying to catch butterflies with a net. The scene was so perfect, so full of love and life, that Charles knew the moment had arrived. That night, after dinner, he gathered Jack and Lily in his studio. From a drawer, he took out a small velvet box. Children, I need to ask you something very important. He began by kneeling in front of them. What would you think if I asked Grace to marry me? If we officially made her part of our family? The children's shouts of joy could probably be heard throughout the neighborhood. Yes, Lily shouted, jumping up and down. I want to be the flower girl at the wedding. And I can carry the rings, Jack added. Charles laughed with his heart so full of love that he thought it might burst. Then it's decided. Now all that's left is for her to say yes. She's going to say yes, Lily assured with all the confidence of a 5-year-old girl. She loves us, and she loves you. Daddy, we all know it. Charles hugged his children, thanking the universe for giving him a second chance to be happy. The next day he would organize everything, the perfect proposal and in the perfect place at the perfect time, because Grace deserved perfection. She deserved magic. She deserved to know that she was loved beyond measure. And Charles Sterling was ready to spend the rest of his life proving it to her. Saturday dawned with a clear sky that seemed to have been painted especially for the occasion. Charles had meticulously planned everything during the last week with the complicit help of Jack and Lily, who had proven to be excellent keepers of secrets. Grace suspected nothing, which made every smile of hers, every carefree gesture, even more precious. We're going out today, Charles announced during breakfast, trying to sound casual. A surprise for everyone. Grace looked up from her teacup, her honey-colored eyes sparkling with curiosity. What kind of surprise? It wouldn't be a surprise if I told you, Charles replied with a mysterious smile. Just dress comfortably, but nicely. We're leaving in an hour. Jack and Lily exchanged knowing glances, barely containing their excited giggles. An hour later, the four of them got into the car. Charles drove toward the outskirts of the city, taking a road that climbed toward the rolling hills of the English countryside. Grace gazed out the window, enjoying the ever-changing scenery of green fields and stone walls, unaware of what awaited her. They arrived at a private garden that Charles had rented for the occasion, an intimate space hidden among ancient trees with a small lake fed by a crystal-clear stream. The place was decorated with thousands of white flowers and lights that twinkled softly even in the morning sun. Charles, this is beautiful, Grace murmured, getting out of the car, her eyes wide. What is all this? You'll see, he replied, taking her hand. Jack and Lily ran ahead, leading them along a path of rose petals that led to a clearing by the lake. There, under an archway draped with blooming wisteria and near a massive willow tree, a table was set with an elaborate lunch. Is this a picnic? Grace asked, laughing with delight. How beautiful. The four of them ate lunch, sharing stories and laughter under the blue sky. It was perfect. Jack told jokes he had learned at school. Lily drew flowers in a notebook she had brought, and Grace felt so completely happy it almost hurt. After lunch, while the children played near the lake under the discreet supervision of the security personnel Charles had hired, he took Grace's hand and led her to the water's edge. "Do you know the exact moment I knew I loved you?" Charles asked, gazing at the reflection of the clouds in the still water. "When?" "It was when I saw you singing to my children in the middle of the night on those security recordings. You didn't know anyone was watching. You didn't expect anything in return. You simply loved them because your heart doesn't know how to do anything else." Grace felt tears welling up in her eyes. "They made it easy to love them. And you made it easy to believe in love it again," Charles replied, turning to look directly at her. "After Elizabeth, I thought my heart was closed forever, that I had had my chance to be happy and that there wouldn't be another one. But then you came along, Grace." "Charles," he didn't let her interrupt, gently placing a finger on her lips. "Let me finish. You arrived with your kindness, your strength, your infinite capacity to love. You gave this family back their lives. You gave me back my life, and every day that passes, I fall more in love with you." Jack and Lily ran up, each taking one of Grace's hands. "Okay," Lily said in her serious little voice. "We have something to tell you." "We wanted you to know," Jack continued, "that you are the best mom in the world, and that we love you very much," Lily added. Grace's tears began to roll freely down her cheeks. "I love you too, my loves. I love you more than anything in the world." "More than Daddy?" Jack asked innocently. Grace looked at Charles, who was smiling tenderly. "I love you all equally. You are my family." Then Charles said, letting go of Lily's hand to kneel on one knee, "Let's make it official." Grace put her hands to her mouth, unable to believe what she was seeing. From his pocket, Charles took out a small blue velvet box. He opened it, revealing a white gold ring with a solitaire diamond that shone like a captured star. "Grace," Charles began, his voice trembling with emotion, "I don't have much to offer you that you don't already have. This house is already your home. My children already call you Mom. My heart is already completely yours. But what I can offer you is a promise. The promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. The promise to honor you, respect you, and support you in every dream you have. The promise to build with you a life full of love, laughter, and moments like this." Jack and Lily had sat down on the grass, watching with huge eyes and smiles that threatened to split their faces in two. "Grace," Charles continued, "would you do me the honor of marrying me, of being my wife, the mother of my children, my partner forever?" The world seemed to stop. The wind stopped blowing. The birds stopped singing. Even the water in the lake seemed to freeze as it moved. Grace looked at Charles, at that man who had seen beyond her domestic worker's uniform and had found the person she really was. She looked at Jack and Lily, those children who had become her children of the heart, and knew there was no other possible answer. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, yes, I want to marry you." Jack and Lily's shouts of joy echoed throughout the garden. Charles stood up, slipped the ring onto Grace's finger, and kissed her, while their children hugged their legs, laughing and crying with happiness. "We're going to have a wedding," Lily shouted, imagining a white dress with flowers and a cake. "I'm going to carry the rings," added Jack, jumping for joy. Charles and Grace separated just enough to hug the children, the four of them forming a perfect circle of love and family. "I love you all," Grace said, looking at each of them. "I love you so much, my heart could burst." "And we love you," Charles replied, "forever." The wedding took place 3 months later, an intimate ceremony in the garden of the mansion, under the same willow tree where it had all begun. Only close friends and family attended. Thomas, who walked proudly alongside his sister to the altar, Mrs. Hudson and the rest of the household staff, who cried tears of joy, some close friends of Charles who had learned to love Grace for the extraordinary person she was. Grace wore a simple but elegant dress, with her hair styled in a soft bun, adorned with fresh flowers. Charles couldn't hold back his tears when he saw her walking towards him, radiant with happiness. Jack and Lily fulfilled their roles perfectly. Lily scattered rose petals with the seriousness of someone performing the most important task in the world, and Jack carried the rings on a silk pillow without dropping them even once. When the vicar asked them to state their vows, Charles took Grace's hands in his own. Grace, you came into my life when everything was dark. You brought light, love, and hope. You taught me that the heart can heal, that love can bloom more than once, that family is chosen as much as it is inherited. I promise to love you in sickness and in health, in wealth and in poverty. Every day of my life, I promise to be your partner, your support, your best friend. I promise to honor your kindness and cherish your heart as the treasure it is. Grace had to stop every few words to wipe away her tears, but when it was her turn to speak, her voice sounded clear and firm. Charles, you gave me something I never thought I would have. A home. Not just these walls, but a place where I belong, where I am seen, where I am loved. You gave me a family in Jack and Lily, two beautiful souls that I will carry in my heart forever. I promise to love you with all that I am. I promise to take care of you and our children with every breath. I promise to be your companion in adventures, your comfort in storms, your celebration in joys. I promise to choose you every day, again and again, forever. When they kissed as husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause. Jack and Lily ran to hug them, and the four of them melted into a hug that was more than just familial. It was the symbol of a love that had been born from the ashes, that had grown against all odds, that had blossomed in the most fertile soil of all, human kindness. The reception was cheerful and full of life. Grace danced with Thomas, with Charles, with the children. Charles gave a speech that made everyone present prun, talking about second chances and angels who arrived disguised as domestic workers. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Charles and Grace escaped for a moment to the terrace, where they had had so many important conversations. "Happy, Mrs. Sterling?" Charles asked, wrapping her in his arms. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Grace replied, resting her head on his chest. "Sometimes I still pinch myself to make sure it's real." "It is real," Charles murmured, kissing her forehead, "and it will be ours forever." A year later, the Sterling family had expanded in beautiful and unexpected ways. Grace had finished her degree in education and had opened a small school for underprivileged children, funded by Charles but run entirely by her. Every day she helped children from similar backgrounds to her own, giving them education, love, and hope. Jack and Lily thrived, happy and secure in their parents' love. They no longer had nightmares, no longer cried for their mother, Elizabeth, though they remembered her fondly. They had learned that the heart is big enough to love more than one mother. And in the mansion's master bedroom, in the crib they had set up next to the bed, slept the newest addition to the family, Hope Sterling, 3 months old, with the honey-colored eyes of her mother and the calm smile of her father. One afternoon, while Grace breastfed Hope in the rocking chair in the nursery with Jack and Lily playing nearby, Charles paused in the doorway to observe the scene. It was exactly the same scene he had witnessed that October afternoon when he returned from his trip and found Grace asleep on the sofa with his children. The same peace, the same love, the same feeling of home. Only now everything was infinitely better, because now there were no secrets, no distance, no doubts, only love. Pure, true, eternal love. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, noticing his gaze. Charles entered the room and knelt beside the rocking chair, stroking his baby daughter's head. "I was thinking about that afternoon when I returned from my trip unannounced and found you all asleep on the sofa. I was thinking about how that moment changed everything, how a single decision, a single moment of truly observing what was happening in my home changed the course of our lives. It was destiny," Grace said softly, "or life giving us a chance." "Second chance," Charles added, "to all of us." Jack looked up from his building blocks. "Daddy, when can we play with Hope?" "When she's a little older, champ. I'm going to teach her how to make flower crowns," Lily declared, "like Mummy taught me." Grace smiled, feeling her heart swell to overflowing. "We'll teach her together, my love." That night, after putting the 3 children to bed, Charles and Grace stayed on the terrace, watching the stars twinkle over London. "Do you know what Thomas told me when he came to visit last week?" Grace asked. "What did he say?" "That Mum would be proud of me, that she always knew I was destined for great things." "He was right," Charles affirmed. "Look at everything you've accomplished. A family, a career, a school that's changing lives." "We did it together," Grace corrected. You gave me the opportunity. You saw me when no one else did. You saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving. Two souls who had found their home in each other kissed under the stars. And somewhere in the vast mystery of the universe, two spirits smiled. Elizabeth, the first wife who had loved her family with all her heart, and Grace's mother, who always knew that her daughter was destined for something special. Because true love never dies. It transforms, multiplies, renews itself, and in the Sterling mansion, love had found a way to bloom brighter than ever. This was the story of Grace, the domestic worker who became the salvation of a broken family. This was the story of Charles, the millionaire, who learned that true wealth is not measured in money, but in love. This was the story of Jack and Lily, two children who lost their mother but gained a guardian angel. And above all, this was the story that love always finds a way, no matter where it comes from or how it begins, because in the end, the only thing that really matters is love. And they had love to spare.